Hey everyone, I'm here with my good friend Kyle Gillette. We just did a couple episodes of the podcast. It was so much fun. He is a professional coach and he also owns a consulting company. He's been in it for 15 years, coached over hundreds of people. He has a really cool system that he calls the Sage Mindset Leadership Program. And he also hosts his own podcast called the Sage Mindset Podcast. GilletteSolutions.com is his website. Kyle, what's up, man?
Hey, good to see you again. I'm excited
Yeah.
to have this conversation.
Yeah, we can kind of like kick back, put our feet up on the desk, relax, have just a little chat after all the heavy stuff we did on the podcast.
Right?
No,
I found that when I interview people, there definitely is this podcast voice or podcast questioning approach. And after we get off the call or the interview, it definitely changes a little bit. And so trying to shift in that direction with my guests is a challenge, but it's just about getting comfortable, and people get a little uncomfortable being recorded. There's something funky about that makes you kind of pump the brakes a little bit.
yeah, it doesn't make it a bad thing because they always bring value, so it's
Right.
not like it's not a bad thing, but it's different. And even professionals, like I notice it less with other podcasters and professional speakers, but there's still something. It's still there because I don't necessarily think they're auditing themselves or editing themselves. I think it's the structure. I think it's the structure of the show. Like you're in, even if it's conversational, it's still a show format, right? And so you expect there to be some kind of structure, some kind of question answer type deal. It's not, and you can make it conversational, but it's being recorded for a podcast show, right? Whereas even this, even though we have the record button hit and we're doing this, the fact that when I explain the premise and I say, look, we're just going to hit record and we're just going to do this and keep it casual, it does change the demeanor. The good stuff still comes out even though record is hit. It's just that there's no expectation of format, I think.
Yeah. Right. And that's nice. It's just hanging out. It's too bad we don't have a beer. That'd be ideal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I do another segment that I've started doing that releases on Wednesdays on the podcast and it's live streamed. It's called Cooking and Conversation, where the guest actually either cooks a dish while we talk or has a dish that they've prepared and we eat together, and we usually crack a beer or have a glass of wine and we talk for about an hour, and we talk about how the food connects people and how it ties in and what it means to them. And then we talk about their business a little bit. And that has been really cool. That's been a cool way to facilitate. I find it very interesting to incorporate other things into the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it's fellowship, right? I mean, ultimately, it's amazing what food does for a conversation. There's something about, I think that's why so many people go out to restaurants. Now we can't, but there's so many people that do, because there's the opportunity to have this fellowship. And it's like there's this thing in front of you that is a buffer that takes away some of the pretense and allows you to just hang out. There's something about having a steaming pile of noodles or something in front of you that relaxes you. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I'm at my in-laws' house for a season as we sell our house, and we've been having some great conversations around the table, even with a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old interrupting. There's still great conversations, and it's just this fellowship around a shared meal, and everybody's been cooking. So my wife will cook, or I'll cook, or my in-laws will cook. And there's something also special about that, where you get to go, hey, look what I made. And then you talk about it and people share their thoughts. So yeah, the idea of fellowship around food is it's really enjoyable.
And breaking bread's always been a thing, right? And I can
Yeah.
say, as a former chef, right, like I can make, it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in which I can pretty much make anything I want whenever I want if I have the ingredients. It's a curse because I can make anything I want whenever I want and enjoy it if I have the ingredients. But I can say that even with that ability to make restaurant food at home if I want to, I still love going to the restaurant because it's that experience. It's that
Yeah.
experience of being out, of being with other people, of not having to worry about doing the dishes and cleaning up in the food, and you can just be there and be present. And it's not that I want to do that all the time, but it's a nice thing to do when you're able to do it. And the other thing that I found that I think super interesting, and I just want to bring this up because I didn't plan this. This is just how ideas kind of evolve. When you take action on something, I believe that action creates other reactions, and it's very powerful. You'll get feedback from it, and you'll notice things that you didn't intend or didn't plan. And I think there's a lot of divine intervention that happens there as well. But one of the things I noticed about this cooking and conversation thing I've been doing is not only do people connect around the food, and do like, if you made something, like your family would be involved in that, and that's unintentionally happened, where, which I'm glad it did, families are involved and they get to spend time together and whatnot. But every episode I've done so far, after the episode's over and the camera goes off, every guest that I've had on who's made something have friends come over and enjoy the meal with them.
Oh, cool.
So it's created that reconnection and that connection that happens outside of the camera or outside of the recording that wouldn't have happened unless we actually did that together.
Yeah, it creating those opportunities is pretty sweet. We, in the neighborhood we used to live in, we created this Facebook group where everybody in the neighborhood was on the Facebook group. And so then we could set up parties, we could set up events. If somebody got the wrong mail, there's just all this exchange. And what I was going to do before we moved was to have a horse tournament in our neighborhood, because I saw there's 7 basketball hoops in our neighborhood, and we could wheel it over to our cul-de-sac and play horse. And it's not gonna work out because I don't live there anymore. But that was the plan.
That's cool. I mean, that coming together, and I think we need it more so than ever now, right? With all of this lockdown stuff, is hopefully we're getting on the back end of that as we record this. And I think we've done a good job as a whole of staying in contact as much as we possibly can using the technology that's available to us today. But there's still something to be said about being able to come together as a community, whether it be in a restaurant, whether it be in a church, whether it be in a synagogue or a temple or whatever, being able to come together physically together. There's something that definitely to be said about that. And I think that two things have happened, and I'd love to hear your take on this since this whole pandemic is, number one, we realize we can be more connected as we're apart. But number two, we realize that it doesn't replace the connection that we have when we come together, actually come together.
Not at all.
So I
You're
think
right.
it's like both sides of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to touch. Touch is huge. I mean, my daughters, they just come up to me and they give me hugs. Go, I love you, Daddy, and I love you too. And they just randomly come up to me and hug me. And there's something really special about that. Obviously, because of the daughter-father thing, but being able to do that with friends. I hug my friends. I hug my dude friends in public. I'm not ashamed. It's not a handshake, it's a hug. And there's something really special about that. And unfortunately, we don't get to do that right now. But what I wanted to ask you was, you had mentioned experience as it relates to cooking and having conversations. Where else do you find that when you're interacting with people that you're having really good experiences? In other words, what's the context for you outside of food that the experience is wonderful because of the context?
I love going to sporting events, like
Mm,
baseball games, football games with family, with friends. Having something, I think it's that, as you said, like one of the things that food does is it gives you something else to have community around. So I think that's also why faith is so powerful, and going to an actual church or a place of worship is because not only are you together in community, but you're together in community around something else that you can, you know, it's a common thing for all of you to put energy into, to put focus on, to get something out of. And I think that, going to like sporting events, or I like to go, one of my friends, he has a huge Facebook group, my best friend, about it's a craft beer community. And so what they
mm,
do is they go to breweries on the weekend with like certain people, and they'll get a big long table, and there'll be like 10 of them, and they'll have 2 or 3 really good beers and just chat and have fun. That's where the Facebook group came from. It came from, they found that when they left, the conversation stopped. So they thought, if we create this Facebook group, it'll continue. And now that group is over 2,000 people strong, and it's just based around those conversations. So I think there's different things that we can do, but I think it's around, having a commonality that we find, or having a difference, but being open to experiencing something else and finding a potential commonality, and then doing it together. I also believe, like when I was in the restaurant, when I was a chef, the best thing about being a chef, the thing that I missed the most, aside from the people, the thing that I missed the most about being a chef was that Saturday night, that first beer on a Saturday night. And it wasn't the beer. The beer tasted better than it ever did, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the beer. It was the fact that we went through this whole week together. We overcame things together. We went almost to war
mm.
together. And now we're all out having that beer together. And that camaraderie of, we accomplished this, and now we're connected here, and we can kind of just exhale and enjoy each other and respect each other for what we did. That's what I miss the most about being in the professional kitchen.
Yeah, and I think that that's why people run. That's why people do hikes. That's why they run in races. I do racquetball tournaments, and there is something to that social interaction. One of my goals in the next 90 days is to run a 5K or a 10K race. I mean, I can run it now, but I haven't done those races before. I did a half marathon several years ago, but there's something about the this community of people that all have the same goal in mind. And then when you accomplish it, no matter how well you accomplish the goal, especially when it comes to running, someone might finish a 5K in 20 minutes and somebody else might do it in an hour. But the one that finished in an hour is going to be celebrated just as much as the one that did in 20 minutes because of the community and the connection there. And there's something really special about that. And I hope that people will see that even more clearly moving forward. I really hope that they'll see that. Let's set some goals. Let's set some purpose so that I can create some fellowship, develop some relationships, and really enjoy the people around me because of commonalities. And then you make these new friendships that you never knew you could have because of this kind of butterfly effect of, well, I decided to do this thing, and then this person over here decided to do this thing, and then all of a sudden we actually connected and we ended up being best friends as a result. And that's kind of some fun stuff that happens.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I think that's why we do our podcasts too, right? It's not to be celebrities, it's to create that community and that commonality around people who are looking for the things that excite us and the things that we like to talk about and learn about, and to have other people be part of that vision. And, I know we're both Christians, so talking about, that whole mission and that whole thing of, Christ coming and building his church and his community from everyone, and that whole, I think the whole background of Christianity that Christ brought is that acceptance, right? Accepting everyone, loving everyone, inviting them in, and us all being tied together through our humanity and divinity through Christ.
Well, I mean, Jesus was a partier. I mean, really, he
Yeah.
would constantly be at parties. I mean, the first miracle is at a wedding,
Yep.
and he's constantly having fellowship and eating with people. And it's there is something about that I think we're drawn to as a result of that divine nature that's within us, that
Mhm.
we're supposed to do that. Even heaven is spoken about as that there's you put a table before us that is, just filled with abundance. And I miss that.
Yeah.
I miss having my friends around me to be
Mhm.
able to do that with, for sure.
And I think the interesting thing that you mentioned there about Jesus and him partying is he partied with people that everyone else would go, "Why are you hanging out with them?"
Right.
And, he would party with the people that needed him, but he would tell them stories. He would teach them. He would tell them that, but he never really forced anyone to do anything. He just
Hmm.
loved, accepted, shared, and the people that understood, that saw the power, followed. I mean, even the disciples, when he called them, he said, "Follow me. I'm gonna, we're gonna do this." But there were people that he asked to follow them, like the rich person that came to him and said, "What do I have to do to get the kingdom of heaven?" He said, "Sell everything, get rid of everything, and follow me." And he just couldn't let go of that. So he didn't force him to
Yeah.
do it, but he always offered and was open and accepting. And I think that's something that we can utilize in our everyday lives as well, is to be open and accepting and loving and offer, but not really use force as much as I see people, like, especially in like the political arena. I see so
Mm.
much out there that when you start to push something and you start with force, and I just go by these threads I see on Facebook and different social media, that it turns into anger and it turns into, wanting to be right. And it's all about seeing it my way and all of these things. And I think that really guides us to missing the real point of us all being one, right?
I found it really interesting. You bring up the political side of things, and I've I've seen people's posts online, and I've seen that people's perspectives are different than mine. Of course, they are, right? um, but what's funny is when I read them, I'm like, I just don't agree with you. I really don't see that, and I don't comment because I don't want to get into that world. But I've also then interacted with them in person, and it's such a different experience. Even if they share the same thoughts, I found that as long as they're rational, not crazy, I find that I really enjoy that interaction. And I think that the shield of Twitter, Facebook really blocks out the humanity of it. And even for me, when I've read those things, I'll judge the person, and then I'll actually interact with them, and I'll go, wow, this person's pretty cool. And now I don't really agree with some of their perspectives, but I really enjoyed this person. In fact, I've had that with two of my clients where they're very much the opposite in terms of their political views and beliefs and all this stuff. But I love those folks. I love my clients. I really want to honor them and take care of them, and most importantly, help them out the direction they want to be helped. And it's maybe I'm being hypocritical by judging them at first, but that's definitely faded in my life. But it's just really interesting how when you get to know somebody, all of a sudden the guard gets dropped on both of you.
Absolutely. And when I read those things, and whether it's my opinion or not, just reading those things with anger or with people trying to convince other people, my first reaction now is that I feel sorry for them, because what kind of place do you have to be in, not only to believe that, but then to go the next step and share that through social
Right.
media, right? So, I mean, that makes me have some, but to your point, when you talk to them in person, it is a different story most of the time. You can have
Right.
disagreements and have conversations and talk about things and have a mutual respect that is very difficult to get online, because I think there's power in the spoken word, right? There's more power in the spoken word than there is in the written word. The written word's very powerful, don't get me wrong. But when you speak it, it puts energy in behind it. It puts inflection behind it. When God created the world, if you read Genesis, he didn't write, let there be light. He said, let there be light, and there was light. So there's something in that spoken word that is super powerful.
Yeah, I'm going to shift subject a little bit here because you brought up God speaking into creation. I read this little snippet, I guess you could say, and it was talking about rest and the significance and importance of rest, and how on the seventh day God rested. But the first 7 days is all about creating. And obviously the first 6 days, it's very obvious that God was creating by speaking things into creation, which is beautiful, right? But then the seventh day, he says he rests. And the article was pointing out that rest is creation also. And I loved that. I went, that is so true, because I know that for me, and if anybody is like me, your mind just races and runs, and you have a million ideas. You have so many things you want to accomplish, and you're driven to do so many things, but then you forget to rest. You forget to take a day off, especially as entrepreneurs and solopreneurs. We don't schedule those in, and we have to take responsibility to do that. I didn't take Memorial Day off. I don't even think about taking holidays because I've never had a job that gave me that opportunity. My work history, I never had a job that I was guaranteed holidays. And so it's embedded in me, both from a farmer's son and just my job history, that you don't take holidays. But when I read that, I went, wow, rest is extremely important. And it's a creative act to rest. And that was enlightening, to say the least, for me.
I love that, because it also reminds me of something we talked about on the podcast episodes, which was your idea for Sage Mindset came to you at 3 a.m. when you were
Right.
resting. You woke up and you're like, oh, that's it. I need to. So I think too, yeah, you going by the example in Genesis, you go ahead and you put in the action, you take all this action, you create, but then you sit back and you allow that creation to do its thing and you get feedback from it. Right. And that's
Yeah.
when other ideas come, because as you're watching and you're getting feedback and things are in motion, action creates reaction. Right. So, I mean, I think, and I talked about this before, I think a big part of my success in life is, and I've reverse engineered this so I understood it better, but I just happen to do this intuitively, is that I have the ability to pinpoint what I want specifically, take massive action towards that, but then simultaneously be open to all the possibilities around me. So I'm not so attached to what I think I should create, so that when I take that action that's focused towards that thing, it creates feedback from the universe or feedback from God. And I can look at that and go, I wonder what would happen if I tried this. I wonder what would happen if I did this. And so I'm not so attached to that outcome, and it leads me in other places. And so evidence of that is, if you would ask me 10 years ago where you think I would be today, I would say probably opening my fourth or fifth restaurant, building my restaurant empire, doing that whole thing as a restaurateur. But because I was open to different things that came up on my journey, 10 years later, here's where I sit and here's what I do. And I can tell you, 10 years ago, I didn't even know what I'm doing right now was a thing. I didn't even know this was a
Hmm.
possibility or an option. But I'm infinitely more fulfilled doing this than I would be opening restaurants and operating restaurants.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the power in that. And taking action, because that through that action you'll gain insight, but not only insight, you'll create skills that you need for the next thing. And I always believe, like, who am I to put myself in a place? Who am I to say that's the best thing for me? I believe that's God's place. He wants to guide me there, but I have to be open to that and take the journey with him. I have to put in the energy and he'll match my energy. And if I'm listening to him and being guided, I'll end up ultimately where he wants me to be, which is ultimately way more beautiful than anywhere I can conceive.
Yeah, my theme verse, or my verse related to the first book I wrote, and also the Sage Mindset, is Jeremiah 29:11, which is, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and to give you hope and a future."
Mhm,
And so I totally get what you're saying. Personality wise, it's interesting because I don't know if you've probably heard of DISC, but I
mhm,
study DISC. A lot of my research is based on DISC, and then this other tool called Motivators.
mhm,
I've taken like 1,500 people through those assessments. And so I have a ton of data
mhm,
on people related to that. And what you're talking about as it relates to motivators is probably a low regulatory
mhm,
and a high aesthetic. And what does that mean? Low regulatory means I see things in black and or in gray. So instead of everything being in black and white, it's gray. So there's options. There's many different ways. It's like 7 lanes on a freeway rather than 2.
mhm,
And then the high aesthetic says I can look at this from a different angle, from the angle of non-traditional perspective, a non normal quote perspective, in other words, from the clouds, and think from an alternative perspective. And so that allows you to have the risk taking nature and the flexibility to go for it. And there's other pieces of your personality that are showing, but uh, those two stood out to me as, and I think the chef part's the creative piece to your personality, the aesthetic piece of, because cooking, especially chef piece, not just making food, but the artistic nature, I think that really played out in your personality and was shown in the work you did as a chef. So I love personalities, and I love it when people bring up things and make their personalities really obvious, because then it's so much fun to talk about that piece of their personality and learn more about them.
yeah, I love that. Give me a little background on your personality, since I'm sure you put yourself through all of these evaluations as well.
Yeah, so disc wise, I'm a ID, so I'm fairly intense I, and then a pretty strong dominance. And what does that mean for the listeners? Basically, I styles are optimistic. Dominant styles base their energy on aggressiveness or anger, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but they're just doers, task people. And then I style is more of a people orientation. And then when it comes to motivators, I'm very practical. I'll take risk, but I'm very practical. And then power oriented, I want power and authority more than or equal to my position. Um, but I am altruistic, so I seek to serve others at the cost of myself. So I'm in a battle with myself frequently because I like to control people. If I'm being brutally honest, and I had one of those conversations with my wife a couple nights ago about how I'm a little bit more controlling than she wants me to be. But anyway, uh, and the battle between wanting to control and also wanting to serve. So um, it's a that's an interesting one to deal with within my own thinking patterns. But we all have those, but with that comes gifting, right? So whatever the thinking patterns are, yours are going to be different than mine, and anybody that's listening, theirs are going to be different than ours, but it's gifting in and of itself. So none of them are good or bad, they just are. And that's man, when I learned that about personalities, judgment about how people think and behave went down so much more. It just became, oh my goodness, you are uniquely wired to do amazing things based on your personality. In fact, there's scripture that says, raise up a child in the way they will go and they will not depart from it. And it's the idea, from my perspective, that we are wired very specifically. We're knit together in our mother's womb. And so we're wired very specifically, but as a father, what I want to do is raise up my kids in the way that they were created, not the way that I want them to be. They're not little versions of me. And the people that we lead, they're not little versions of us either. They're wired uniquely to be their unique selves. And so let's empower them within that uniqueness. So I'm getting up on a soapbox here, but I
No, I love
love
it. Keep going.
I just love the power of knowing that about people and being able to use it to empower them and help them down their own path in a way that's natural. It's not a shove. It's not a push. It's more of a pull. Like, hey, come this way. This is where you're supposed to be going. And it may be very different than me, but because I can see it through the data that I know, it's okay because I'm helping them follow the path that fits them best. And this is why whenever I do my coaching or I do my programs, I start with that. I always start with their personality and doing a very deep dive into their personality, because otherwise I might be leading them astray if I'm asking them questions that really don't fit them or suggesting things that don't fit them. I do not want to do that. That's for sure. So, yeah.
I love that. I love what you said about pushing and pulling, because I've always said that whenever you push something, it tends to push back. But if you go where you're pulled, it gives you the latitude and the flexibility to look around and notice things you wouldn't see otherwise. So it's all about being guided as opposed to imposing your own will. Now, there are times
Yeah.
when you have to be firm and you have to stay on the path, but there are also times when surrender is the power move.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to bring us back to spirituality, I mean, that's really what we need to do as people, is just kind of release, let go, surrender, and control primarily, because we don't have control. I don't care how powerful you are as an individual. No matter in your little kingdom, I don't care how powerful you are, you really still don't have control. And the quicker we can realize this, the better. And I know for me that's a big battle, because it's wired into me. And there's people out there, especially entrepreneurs, that they're wired to want and to desire and to seek control. And the sooner we can let that go, the better. And you have to do it wisely, of course, but lots of entrepreneurs are wired like myself, and so I know your battle. I know
Yeah.
what it is to not want to let go, but know you need to. And there's some beauty to it when you do. There's some really beautiful things that happen because the stress lessens, new opportunities come your way. There's so much that happens when you let go of control and dictating what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I'll never forget. I went to a men's Catholic retreat over a weekend, and the priest that was there speaking is a pretty well known priest, and he works with a lot of men. And I'll never forget. He went to the front of the room and he goes, "Gentlemen, you think you have control, you think you control everything, but do you realize that you can't even take your next breath unless God says it's okay?" He was like, "How much control do you think you really have?" And that really hit me hard. That was like, wow, that's true. That's right. But at the same token, the greatest gift God gave us is existence, is our life. The second greatest gift he gave us is free will. So we have the ability to make decisions and to decide for ourselves and to look at things and, do things. So I think that it's that balance of knowing that I don't control things, but I'm able to make these decisions that are important, that put me in different positions and give me different opportunities. And it's that constant realization and respect for that and battle with that.
Yeah, it's act and obedience.
Yeah.
There's the need to act,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a need to be obedient. And okay, so this is a little bit off the wall here, but ACT is an acronym, and I love acronyms.
I know you do. That's good. Keep it.
And I learned that ACT, it's actually ACTS, but ACT is application, or I'm sorry, is adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. So as soon as I said that word, it made me think about that process. And I think whether you're doing that and focusing on God, or you're doing that and just focusing on letting go, that's a big piece of how to let go of control, is that acts: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. Supplication just means asking, essentially, uh, asking for something. But there, I don't know what it is about acronyms and me. I have a terrible memory. It's actually getting better, to be honest, but my memory is really a battle for me. And so acronyms really help me to overcome that battle. And plus they're fun because they come up in the right moments for me, I've noticed. And then I can share them really easily with people, and then they stick. And that's why I think why I enjoy them.
It makes it easy to remember. I love it. It's a great tool to use. And if it's, helping people remember and apply, because the application is really the most important part. I mean, the information is just step one, but it's the application of the information that leads to the transformation. So if that helps them apply it, I think it's doing its thing. It's very powerful. Kyle, thank you so much for everything you shared, not only on this series or on this video, but also on the podcast. If you're listening to this right now on the podcast, you can go back and listen to the episodes that we did. If you're watching this on social media, the podcasts are coming soon, so get ready. Buckle up for that. Again, GilletteSolutions.com is where you can find Kyle and also subscribe to his podcast, the Sage Mindset Podcast. Kyle, thanks again so much, my friend, and let's do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. I appreciate it.